right, so now I'm going to talk about inverse variation. The equation for an inverse variation is y equals k over x. K is still called the constant of variation. To find k in an inverse variation, you are going to take your x value and your y value and simply multiply them together. Remember, in direct, you divided. Think direct, divide to find k. For inverse, you're going to multiply. Okay, and also remember in this equation, x is on the bottom. In direct, it was next to it. The graph, what these look like, is a lot different than our direct variation. Remember, direct variation were linear and they went through the origin. For inverse, these functions are rational functions. So they have these two curves called branches, and then you have some asymptotes. And those asymptotes are always going to be at 0, 0, because there is no plus minus in these. It is simply a number over x. So on your worksheet for this week for inverse, they're going to give you a table of values, and they're going to ask you if the table of values is an inverse variation or if it's a direct variation. So let me see if I can find one that's not going to be on your worksheet. So if they give you a table like 2, 1, negative 1/3, 6, 3, and negative 1, and they want to know, is this direct or is this inverse? So one way you could graph it, and you can see if it's a line, or you can see if it takes on the shape of a rational function, or you can just look at your x and y's and you can multiply them. So if I multiply and I get the same value throughout, meaning it's constant, then that would indicate it's an inverse if I can multiply. So when I multiply here, I get 12, 3, and positive 1/3. So because those are all different, it is not constant. It's not an inverse variation. So when I multiplied, I got 12, 3, and I had positive 1/3. They're all different, so that makes it non-inverse. For direct, if I divide, remember to find k, you divide if it's direct, y over x. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. 3 divided by 1 is 3. Negative 1 divided by negative 1/3 is also 3. Notice they're all the same. They're constant. So this table of values represents a direct variation. I'll show you another example, and of course you're going to already assume that this one's going to be inverse, and you may be correct. So I'm just going to create a table of values. And so now if I take a look, the question is it direct or is it inverse? Well, if I divide y by x, I get 1/6, I get 25 over 6, and I get 6. So they're all not the same, so they're not constant, so it's not direct. Again, when I divided, I got 1/6, 25 over 6, and 6. So they're not constant, so it's not direct. To find out if they're inverse, you would multiply to find your k. Remember, divide to find direct, multiply to find inverse. All right, so if I multiply, I get 150. If I multiply, I get 150. If I multiply, I get 150. So it is inverse because those values are all constant. So on your worksheet, when you have to determine if the table is direct or indirect or inverse, just make sure you divide to see if it's direct, multiply if it's constant, it's inverse. Then they're going to give you an equation. They're going to ask you, is this direct or inverse? As long as x is in the denominator, it's inverse. If x is upstairs, it is direct. X on the bottom is inverse. X on top is direct. And of course you have to have y equals. So solve the equations for y and then determine where that x location is. And make sure it's in y equals mx supposed to be where b is 0 here. You don't want anything there. You don't need anything outside of here, because then it's not going to be inverse or direct. Then they're going to have you graph some. You can graph those on Desmos. Not really worried about the graphs because I don't like the scaling that they did on those. So I may just tell you to, use Desmos to graph those, but they're going to be graphs that look like this. And then they're going to have you to write an equation and then find out what the missing value is. So let me show you what that example looks like. Very similar to what I did on my direct video. Okay, all these were direct. This time we're going to look at inverse and how to set those equations up. So if I do, and I'm making these numbers up, so they're probably not going to be very perfect. But if I say if y equals 3, when x equals 5, find y when x equals 7. So this is an inverse, remember. So in order to write my equation, I need to figure out what k is. And up here it tells you how to find k. You take your x and your y and multiply them together. So take these two numbers, really simple, and you multiply them together. If it was direct, we would be dividing, but it's not direct, it's inverse. So we are going to multiply. So when I multiply 3 times 5, I get 15. So this is my equation. Now to find the missing piece, you just simply plug in. So I need to find y when x is 7. So here we go. Y equals 15, plug in 7. Can't reduce, can't do anything with it, so that is my answer. And that's all you have to do for those. Write your equation and then plug in your second half of your statement here to solve for whatever variable. And I'll do another example. So if y equals 6.5 when x equals 2, this time we'll find x. Find x when y equals, I don't know, 10. Again, just totally making these numbers up. So to find my equation, y equals k over x is my equation, but I got to know what k is. Do you remember how to find k? That's right, you simply multiply these two numbers together. So 6.5 times 2 is 13. So here is my equation. So now we want to know what x is when y is 10. So we're going to plug 10 in for y. And we have to solve this equation for x. So to solve this equation for x, I could set up a proportion very easy. So I get 10x equals 13, divide by 10, x is 13 over 10. Super simple. All right, so that is an inverse variation. There's the equation. X is on the bottom, it's inverse. To find your constant of variation, you multiply your x times y. So if you're given a table and you find out that your constant is multiplying, then it's inverse. If your constant is when you divided, then it's direct. And when you're given a situation and they tell you it's inverse, so they vary inversely, then you would set up your equation, find your k value by multiplying, and then plug in to solve for x or solve for y, depends on what they're asking you for. All right, and that is inverse variation. Hope that review was easy and that you can now do the assignment that has you do inverse variation. Thanks, guys.